Deuteronomy. When last we left Moses, they were just getting started. We're in Deuteronomy. We'll be in chapter 5, which is where we'll start this morning. Before we jump into that, let me just give you a couple of reminders. What would that be? February 16th, right after services Sunday morning. A guy, Marcus McKee from World Bible School, is going to be here, and he's going to talk to us about this ocean bridge thing that we're going to start doing with World Bible School. It basically is we'll be grading tests or grading assignments for World Bible School students in Kenya. He'll collect them from his students all through his area. He'll take them to a service center type thing, I guess, where he will then scan them, upload them, and then I'll go download them and print them off here and distribute them to our team to grade them. You may think, okay, that doesn't require a whole lot of training, I don't think. But we're talking a whole lot of lessons. I mean, there's a missionary, not in Kenya, but one of the original Ocean Bridge guys that does like 500 a month. So it's going to be a lot of lessons. So we need a lot of people. Like I said, what we're going to do is we have a few already. We have some who have been involved with this forever. Kara's done this a similar thing for Butch for a while. So she can answer probably any questions you might have a little bit as far as the grading of it goes. But this is a little bit different system. But we'll just, right after services Sunday morning, we'll have lunch together. And then Marcus will take an hour and a half and kind of explain it all to us and how it all works. So if you're interested in that, talk to me about it or just register through the church team dealie. Then, gentlemen, not a ton of information there yet because Wayne and I are still kind of ironing out our topic. But Wayne Jones is going to be our speaker for our men's rally. We are going to do it here at the building again. We've had, for those of you who have been here for a while, we used to alternate years between here and Trinity Pines. And we have a lot more guys when we do it here. And we also open it for our sister congregations, and it's good for them. We had a handful of guys from Fruitland, Caldwell, some from Boise last year, and they appreciate it. That it's something that they can be a part of, and I think it's a good deal. But anyway, Wayne Jones will be March 28th and 29th. He'll be Friday night and Saturday morning, and then he'll also teach class Sunday morning and preach to us Sunday morning. Wayne's the new president at Bear Valley, and I've met him a time or two. Jared's gotten to spend some time with him. He's taken over Denny Petrillo is still there, but Wayne is an acting president. So I'm excited to hear what he has to say about the direction with the school and then his topic for that weekend. Okay, enough commercials. Any prayer requests? Richard's going to lead us in a prayer. Any particular prayer requests this morning, Risha? Kyle, Imlay, knee, that stuff. Anything else? All right, Richard.
Father, we come before you this morning, and we are just so thankful that you've allowed us to come here and gather together. Father, I pray that you would be with us as we look into your word, and that you would help us to remember the things that we have learned and read here today. Help us to move those things from our head down to our hearts, so that we might put them to use in our lives and serve you better. Lord, this morning we lift up Kyle to you. I pray that you would be with him in his knee problems. Just let your healing hand rest on him and be comforted, and that you would help the doctors figure out what the problem is going on. Again, Father, we thank you so much for what you've given to us. Pray that you would be glorified in the name of your Son.
Amen. Okay, I neglect. It's terrible. I thought of this during the prayer. Richard's under the weather and not feeling good, and he leaves for Africa in 10 days, so he needs to get better fast. It'd be nice if he'd get better in the next hour, but he's not going to. We're at this moment with Israel. They're about to cross the Jordan River into the Promised Land, this land that they have waited for literally for centuries, but now specifically for 40 years where they wandered in the desert because of their their lack of trust in God, their concern for what they saw, not what God had already told them, which is a whole lesson in and of itself. But where we left off last week, Moses was going to begin to retell the Ten Commandments. And we talked a little bit as we started about as Israel stood at the foot of the mountain the first time, they said, yeah, we'll do these things, we'll do these things. But their attitude throughout that early time and then for the 40 years conveyed this idea of, oh great, it's more rules we have to live by. Well, now 40 years later, when they've dealt with the punishment of that attitude, Moses says it's time to give these rules again, just as a reminder. Again, we've talked about this. The Deuteronomy is the second giving of the law. Deuteronomy 5, verse 29. Let's see, verse 28 and 29. The Lord heard your words when you spoke to me. He said to me, I've heard the words that these people have spoken to you. Everything that they have said is right. The people are saying, yeah, we're going to do that. We're going to go back through what he went over. But even at the end again here, they're saying, yeah, we're going to do this. We're ready to follow these rules. Verse 29, if only they had had such a heart to fear me and keep all my commands forever, so that they and their children would prosper forever. The reminder here that Moses gives them, that God gives them through Moses, is that these rules are for their own good. And that's really the basis of all of this. As God relates this litany of commands to the people, he's saying, listen, I'm setting up boundaries for you all. I'm telling you how to live. I'm telling you what's going to be good for you all. And as we looked at it a little bit last week, what we see in the Ten Commandments is this whole idea that what these commands center in is relationships. And we talked a little bit as we wrapped up last week about, Jesus himself said, when he was asked, what's the greatest command? Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And that's what we see in the Ten Commandments. It's about relationships between the people and God and the people and the people. And Moses makes it clear right there before he even gets into this. This is, I think, where he left off. In chapter 5, verses 4 and 5, he makes it clear that these are God's words. This isn't his idea. He's not the one laying down the law on these people. He's saying, listen, God wants you to know this stuff. I'm just sharing with you what God wants you to know. And as when we closed last week, I left you with this thought. Think about the idea of adoption. There's legal requirements in that. I mean, there's legalities in that. And as I thought about it after I mentioned that last week, I was like, well, sometimes people mess that all up. But yeah, there's some people who take advantage of things like that. I get it. But the vast majority of the time, let's say, someone who wants to adopt a child says, I want to bring this child into my home because I want to love them. I want to nurture them. I want to raise them in a better situation or in a good situation. Yes, there are legal requirements. It doesn't mean they don't love the kid. I mean, that's what I think I said last week, that, I mean, you can't just go on a trip to, Kenya or somewhere and just go, I want that kid, and take it. I mean, that's not how that you go to jail for. But to adopt a child, you go through the requirements. You go through what you have to do. That doesn't change the love. That's the picture that Moses is trying to give to the people. And this is really the theme through the whole deal, through the whole of Deuteronomy, that he'll remind them, yes, there are expectations, but God loves you. God will bless you. God has expectations. God will punish you if you don't follow his rules. But the rules are there for your own good. Okay, so the title of this lesson, for myself, you don't know it, but I call this 10 everybody knows. Because the 10 Commandments are maybe, besides John 3:16, the 10 Commandments, or at least that phrase, the 10 Commandments, is one of the most common Bible-y things that any person off the street might know. Yeah, there's a John 3 something and the 10 Commandments, that they remember Charlton Heston or whatever. But that's Moses, for those of you who don't know. But the idea with the 10 that everybody knows, I don't think that's necessarily as true anymore. I mean, I really don't. I mean, we culturally have shifted away from that idea of the Ten Commandments. Now, let me just clarify, just to get this out of the way, the disclaimer. We understand that the covenant we live under, the new covenant, 9 of the 10 commandments still apply. The Sabbath, we remember it differently, and that's the only, the idea of keep a day for the Lord is still there. It's just not the Sabbath like it was under the old law. The rest of the 9 repeat in the New Testament somewhere. So, there's always this debate or whatever. People say, well, we don't live under the 10 commandments. Well, yeah, we don't. We live under 9 of the 10, and then the 10th sort of. But as it is, as they are, the 10 commandments were obviously the Jewish law. But like I said, they still apply to us in so many different ways, in so many different principles. The first 4, like I said, as we'll break these down in a second, the first 4 are about man's relationship with God. Now, when we think about this, let's just look, just to be true to what the scriptures actually say. Chapter 5, verse 6. Let's start on verse 4. The Lord spoke to you face to face from the fire on the mountain. At that time I was standing between the Lord and you to report the word of the Lord to you, because you were afraid of the fire and did not go up the mountain. And he said, now let me just stop there. We talked after class a little bit last week. That's a little bit of license from Moses, because he says that you were afraid and you wouldn't come up the mountain. They were told not to come to the mountain. Yes, they were afraid, and then they got away from the mountain. But this is Moses kind of Mosesing here a little bit and goes, you people were scared to death that I went up there and stood before. Not that it's a lie, it's just, he's just kind of being the way he is with the people. He kind of sometimes has to say, you people did this. But
that's not the first time it's done it. When he talks about
yeah.
spies, God told him to send in spies in the actual account. But in this account, he says, you people wanted to send in spies.
Yeah.
So there's been multiple times where
he takes a little narrative license.
Liberty
yeah.
And bringing the people into the story more.
Yeah. Yeah, and he does that, in my opinion, he does it in a way for just that reason, to make them accountable too. This is all about them. Cheryl.
Both times he went up there, he had to go 40 days and 40 nights with no food and no water. That would kind of irritate me.
I was going to say, no wonder he's irritable. But he starts this off, and okay, let's go back to what he said. You didn't go up because of the mountain. And he said, verse 6, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the place of slavery. Do not have other gods besides me. Okay, this one we understand. This is honestly the first couple of commandments for our time frame. Or maybe I'm just speaking for myself. These are the 2 I kind of blow over the quickest. I don't do that. I don't live someplace that we have idols. I don't do that sort of stuff. What is the point of this command? To start with this number 1 command. What's God's point with this? Because we know, let me just spoiler. Number 2 is no graven images. So what's the difference? Yeah.
You could feel like something else was telling you, your own self. You can make yourself God.
I think what God is saying here, he's demanding total faithfulness. He's saying, speaking for God here, he's saying, okay, we'll get to the idols in a minute. But first of all, don't put anything in the place of God. And that includes yourself. You don't get to make the decisions. I think, my opinion is, this is why God leads with this. Because he says, now I'm about to give you a whole bunch of laws. I'm about to tell you a whole bunch of things about how you're supposed to live your life. You people in this covenant we've talked about since the beginning of the quarter, this covenant relationship, God says, here are the terms. Sign on the line and everything will be great, but you don't get to negotiate. This isn't a back and forth. This is the deal. This is what it is. And I think what God says in this commandment is that anything that puts God in second place is a violation of this. Anything. And again, we'll get to idols in a minute. I'm just talking about whether it's for our culture. Maybe it's a hobby. Maybe it's a whatever. Maybe it's job. Maybe it's work. Maybe it's family. Whatever it is. Anything that you can say, God, I know I ought to be doing fill in the blank, but instead I'm going to do this. That's a decision you're making that is setting God aside. And I think that's why God starts with this. He says, listen, you people have to know what the parameters are. You're going to go into this land that it's going to be a great place, but you're going to have a ton of influences. So first of all, let's just make it clear that I'm in charge. That I make the rules, you need to follow them. Now that sounds kind of severe and can seem kind of harsh, but again, God's saying this is what's best for you. This is what's going to work out best for you all. Then he gets to number 2. Verse 8, do not make an idol for yourself in the shape of anything in the heavens above or the earth below or the waters underneath. Do not bow in worship to them and do not serve them, because I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. And here's the caveat. This is one of the things that there are some of these commands that he says even in the command. Here's what you can expect. Punishing the children for the father's iniquity to the 3rd and 4th generations of those who hate me, but showing faithful love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commands. There's a lot of material right there. I mean, God's not just saying don't carve an image. He's saying, because here's why, because I'm a jealous God. Now, is God saying that's a negative attribute of himself? Is God saying, yeah, that's something I really need to work on? No, he's saying, I am in charge here. And it's because I love you people. I would have wiped you out a long time ago. But he says, so don't make any idols. Now, why is that pertinent for them?
They like to be like other nations. They worship a rock in their place, and it watches over them. And they don't understand the concept that God's everywhere. He sees you. He's with you. But that's not enough. They want to have that like other nations.
Yeah.
A location that is dominated by location-specific deities.
Yeah.
So you're going to have places of worship. You're going to have an idol set up. So there's an idol. There's a God that we worship in the south, and there's a God we worship in the north, and there's a God we worship on the coast, and there's a
Yeah.
God we worship in the mountains. And they enter this place, and it's going to be everywhere. And it's going to be, it's almost like you go to Dallas, you're going to go to a Cowboys game. You go to New York, you go see a Yankees game. You go to San Francisco, you go see a Giants game.
You leave.
But it's the same idea. When in Rome, you do as the Romans did.
Right.
And they're gonna see all these things. They're gonna want to adopt them.
Yeah, absolutely. Eric.
With that, all these other gods, those are created by the people on their terms.
Yeah. And you have to think, too, these people just spent, as a nation, as a culture, literally. I mean, you think they spent 400 years in Egypt. And in the Bible, that's like 7 pages. And we go, well, they're out of Egypt. Think about Idaho 400 years ago. I mean, Boise was a little bitty town. No, it didn't even exist. I mean, so it's an entire culture that has grown up, lived life with Egyptian gods everywhere. I mean, there's a great book. It's a book, and then I've seen several studies called "Against All the Gods of Egypt." That if you look at the 10 plagues, it is God going shooting down the Egyptian deities. And okay, I've shared this with you before, and I think we even talked about this last week. It's easy for me to look at people in the Bible. Specifically, I think of the nation of Israel in this time when they drift away from God, and we know what's going to happen. They're going to do this over and over. And I think of the Pharisees, and I'm like, man, those people, they were clueless. And I think about this commandment from God to not make idols and all the stuff that they've had to deal with. Yeah, representations like the Egyptian gods. None of that for sure. But when I think about that, I think, that's so weird. It's so weird that they made idols. All those people made idols. think about how influenced we are by our culture. I mean, like just what Adam was saying. If you move to Dallas, the Dallas Cowboys are going to bleed into your blood. I mean, it's just going to happen. I mean, Eric's going, no, it will not happen. We lived in Denver for 2 years, and I kind of started becoming a Broncos fan. They would have orange, so that helped. But I mean, we moved here. We moved here, and I'll be true with you. We moved here, and Boise State was this school that I'd heard some about. We'd seen their blue field on TV. I just thought that was quaint, and I was like, oh, they're so cute. And we moved here in like 3 months. I'm a giant fan. And then they beat OU in the Fiesta Bowl, and they're like my second favorite team forever. But we're so influenced by what we're around. And for us, you know, if let's just say the Mount Sinai and the Ten Commandments started today, there might not be a command number 2, make no images. It might be break your phone. You know, it might be, okay, get all social media off your phone. That might be command number 2. What?
I mean, like, sure, like I could look up my phone. I like it. It's convenient. But what about like all the singers that these girls worship? Taylor Swift. They sing her songs, wear her stuff, buy her clothes. Like she can do no wrong. And then if she does something wrong, everybody's in shock. You know, like Queen Beyonce. Like it's all these people that can be worshipped as well. You know, are we like obsessing over these people? Isn't that a form of idol worship?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they're called influencers for a reason. But, I mean, again, the honest truth is most 13-year-old girls don't spend a whole lot of time around Taylor Swift. You know, most 15-year-old guys aren't looking at, fill in the blank, aren't looking at some superstar guy and going, oh, I want to be like that. In normal life, they're looking on their phones. They're looking on whatever app it is that, whoever they follow is feeding them information that's shaping their lives. And luckily that just happens to teenagers. But that's the idea. I think that guys, don't make anything become this thing that you hold on to, that you shape into something that you want it to be like. Like Eric was saying, it's, if you're a people in the desert like they were, the idea of a specific rain god would be a good idea. We need this guy to show up more often. We need the rain god. We need the crop god, because our all-inclusive God just seems too general. So God says, don't make those images, because those people need. And we see this again throughout once we get through the Ten Commandments. We see this whole idea that God is saying, teach the people who I am. Not who they want me to be, but who I really am. Rebecca.
I was thinking about the scripture in the New Testament that talks about greed being idolatry.
Yeah.
I always had trouble making that connection when we talk about idols as like physical things that worship or human beings have power to. So can you help me understand better why greed is idolatry?
That verse would be Colossians 3:5, because I skipped over it accidentally. Therefore, put to death what belongs to your earthly nature: sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desire, and greed, which is idolatry. So why is greed idolatry? I'll let you answer Rebecca's question. Now, let me put it this way. Is wanting a bigger, better car for my family because we now have 3 kids instead of 2, so I'm going to have to spend a little money to get this big car. Is that idolatry? Probably not. I've had this car for about 6 months. I hate it. I want the biggest, fastest one because my neighbor next door got one better than me and I hate him. That becomes idolatry. And the idea, I think, is the difference between when desire becomes greed, becomes envy. I want what this guy has because I don't like the fact that he has it. I want it. I think that's kind of where greed comes in. Jeff.
I just Googled the definition of greed right there, just for the saving of myself. It says intense and selfish desire for something, especially wealth, power, or food.
Yeah.
But here it gives wealth, power, order. But like, and I think it kind of goes back to the intense and selfish desire, the selfishness of. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's part of that is I think it kind of comes into that. Am I comparing? I mean, if I want this because I need it, it's beneficial for me, even if it is in culture's eyes, in the world's eyes, it's striving for something bigger, better. Maybe it's important. Maybe I need it for a certain reason. If it's I want it because Steve has it and I want something better than him, I think that becomes greed. Somebody,
Well, I think it's the motivation, if it's your motivation or what drives you.
yeah,
I think it's your intent part. I need a little bit less money to make sure I can take care of my family, or, yeah, I want a new car because, well, it's take that, I want it better. If I think the intent that you have, whatever it may be, power,
yeah, the motivation makes a difference. John,
So I think this is also where we start, like sometimes I have a hard time differentiating between commandment 1 and commandment 2.
yeah,
It's like with commandment 1, no other gods. Commandment 2 is what you're going to set up in place of God.
right,
Right? And I think that greed and idolatry speaks to that. These are these other things that you are paying more attention to than God. Things you're putting in God's place.
yeah. It's almost like God gets more specific with number 2.
Well, I was just personally thinking, like, was the commandment against the physical thing, the physical idol, or was the commandment against stopping them from having something that they pay more attention to, or that they just whatever, like, like Risha brought up a phone. Yeah, a phone is just a physical thing, and we all have them. There's no commandment against the phone, but like the attitude, or like, if I'm choosing to spend all my time on my phone instead of doing something else, right? And then I guess, like I could have a little golden calf statue or something
Yeah,
somewhere. That doesn't mean it's an idol,
yeah,
It doesn't mean it's an idol. It's just, So I guess greed as the attitude kind of, it goes.
yeah, exactly.
I think it becomes an obsession, and
Yeah.
that will take your mind off of worshiping God.
Yeah, and it goes back to that idea. Anything that puts God in second place. This is in this context, it is a little bit more physical, but it's just that idea that God's saying, you need to know who I am. Laura.
To me, this is just screaming like the devil just in every back then. Like, I mean, he knows that if I just throw this out here and you guys want this, like I can just throw it out there and see how many fish I
Yeah.
catch. Like I just give everybody a phone. How many people can I catch to just veer away from God? Um, and these are conversations I have constantly with students.
Oh, yeah.
Be careful what you watch. Be careful what you look at. It's not real. Talk to your parents. Yeah, it's just, to me, it's just the devil just, how much can I catch from people?
Yeah, and that was their culture. Big, shiny, cool-looking idols. I mean, big, giant fish that were idols. Big, giant, goat-headed things that were, people are like, ooh, that's kind of cool. We ought to worship that guy. But it was. Those were the influencers of the day. And what this verse tells us, and I think this is part of the great application for us today, we need to just as seriously teach God's unique nature. God is who he is, not who we want him to be. So often you get into discussions about salvation or worship or some of those things, and people go, "Well, the God that I know wouldn't condemn me for fill in the blank." Well, the God that you know is the same God I know, because he's the same God. He's the only God there is, and he's all in here. So, if you think something differently about God than I do, one of us isn't correct. We need to figure out who God is. That's that. And again, for those of you with children, that's so important to get instilled in kids' head. God is God, and we're not. And there's some things that we might be uncomfortable. Loving your neighbor as yourself can be uncomfortable, especially when it comes to the next step, pray for your enemies. Nobody likes to do that. Well, that's God's decision. That's what God asks us to do. Take care of the orphans and the widows. That's uncomfortable. That can be awkward. That's not our call. God said do that. So we need to be those who do that. Okay, so the unique nature of God is included in this. The third commandment, don't take the name of thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Nice. Okay, now this is the no cuss commandment, right? That's what this was to me as a kid. Don't take the Lord's name in vain. Don't say bad words. It's respecting the name of God. Now, when we say the name of God, what does that mean?
Kind of saw on my phone a 30-second video about this, but
Mhm.
it was just like saying it wasn't just like saying like, oh my God. It's about whatever you do in the name of the Lord. Like if you're going out and you're stealing, you're saying, well, God told me to. That's what it means to take the Lord's name in vain. You're not upholding the honor of God.
So,
With what you do.
so what is not? I'm not asking for names. I'm saying, what is the name of the Lord? What does that phrase mean? Yeah, but I mean, beside there's Yahweh, there's Jehovah Jireh, there's the different specific. What does that term mean? What is the name of the Lord? On His behalf? Reputation? His nature? His authority? I mean, my age-old example for this is the old movies where the guy robs the bank and the policeman pulls out, stop, in the name of the law. That's the name. It's the authority, the nature, the character, all that about God, and we need to respect that. Now, what Risha said, if you're doing something negative in the name of the Lord, what does Colossians 3:17 tell us? Most things you do in church, do those in the name of the Lord. Whatever you do in word or deed, as followers of Jesus, we do it all under the name of Jesus. So that means everything we do, and this takes this whole Lord's name in vain thing differently. I tell people I'm a Christian, I'm wearing the Lord's name. And if I behave poorly, I am taking the Lord's name in vain. And that's hard to think about. It's like, wait a minute, I liked it better when it was don't say bad words. But it comes down to this idea that we can't toss God's name, and I meant to put that in quotes, God's character, God's authority. We can't toss that around casually. Now, when I've taught this at camp, here's another thing that I throw out because I think it applies to us sometimes. We sing in here together. Sometimes songs we don't know as well. Sometimes we don't think we can sing, and we sit there and sing. We praise thee, O God, Son of thy love. It's almost time for this to be over. Mm-hmm. That's taking the Lord's name in vain. When you're saying I'm praising God and you're doing it flippantly and casually, that's not respecting the name of the Lord. Now, does that mean you have to know every word of every song and sing? No, that's not what I'm saying. Focus. You're worshiping God, and it requires your intent. The reason I do this at camp is we're not so much anymore. We used to have some songs where it was like little clappy things and then weird little words, and kids would miss the actual words of the song, but they'd miss they'd get the hoo-ahs and the woo-woo-woo. And it's like, what are we doing here? But anyway, but it applies to us too. When we're in there singing Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound, and what we're thinking about is, amazing pot roast at home, how sweet the gravy. I mean, what are we thinking about as we're worshiping God? If we're not focused, we're being casual about God. And I don't think that's just my opinion. I'm telling you, that's what it means to worship. The word worship means an intention. It means to kiss toward. It means I'm actively engaging in this act toward God. And if I'm not engaging, I'm not functioning under the name of God in a respectful manner. So that's number 3. Number 4, remember the Sabbath day. This is, I've talked about this. This is the one that doesn't repeat specifically in the New Testament because their Sabbath day is different from the Lord's day. But the concept, the idea of a day of spiritual renewal, I think absolutely carries over. A day that you spend in focus on God. You spend some time in worship in the morning. You spend time in fellowship. You spend time in study. Then you get the afternoon. Whatever you do with the afternoon, I don't know. It's up to you, I guess. But then you come back at 5 o'clock. You worship some more. It's a day that you spend refreshing, recommitting, being reminded of who you are, being reminded of what this relationship is with other people. I should just read this, huh? Oh, in verse 11, do not misuse the name of the Lord your God. That's what I meant to point out. The idea of misuse, then that's what the Christian Standard says. But then verse 12, be careful to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. You're to labor 6 days and do all your work, but the seventh is a Sabbath to your Lord, your ox and all these things, so that your male and servants may rest as you do. It's the concept of just taking a time to just renew that relationship. Now, again, we don't do the Sabbath thing. The Sabbath day isn't commanded. In fact, honestly, keeping the Lord's Day the same way isn't commanded, but there are some similarities, right? I mean, the Sabbath was their day of sacrifice. The Sabbath was their day of worship. Obviously, some real similarities. But I think the main thing that we need to cross over, I guess, is just the idea of remember it. Dedicate that day to God. And I get it. People have to have jobs that require them sometimes to work on some. I understand all of that. But to the best of our ability, we ought to be giving this day to God. I mean, we ought to be given everything we can to at least take one day out of the 7 to say, I'm just going to focus on my relationship with God today. I'm going to worship with my church family. I'm going to talk to my kids about their whatever they did in Bible class. I'm going to talk to my friends about, how was your week? Is there anything I can do to encourage you or pray for you? Do those things that help us together remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. That's the thing that I think we miss sometimes because we don't have the specific command. We don't have the command, remember the Lord's day and keep it holy. We have the principle, I believe, but this is the idea of take that time of renewal. Well, we got 6 more to go through here. Okay, now the theme shifts. First 4, us and God. The next 6 are us with each other. And it is super interesting to me that he starts with this one. That as we shift away from relationship with us and God to us and other people, first thing he points out is this one. I should have read 15 too. Verse 16, honor your father and your mother as the Lord your God has commanded you. And again, here's some motivation. So that you may live long and so that you may prosper in the land the Lord your God is giving you. It's interesting that he sets this up, this shift around family. He's talking about husbands and wives and children. But listen, we all have family. I mean, we all have those who are around us as, whether it's parents, siblings, if they're not around you, there are people that we have a church family. But in this specific context, he's talking about the home. That the home is the training ground. The home is where it begins. And our culture is losing this. And I'm not going to go off on a tangent on this, but I could. But this is God saying, remember, number one, I'm the rule giver. I'm in charge here. When I come to the discussion about you with other people, I'm going to start with how we deal with our homes. How important that is. And we know where we go in chapter 6, where he reminds us, teach this constantly. Remind your family all the time. But he says, this is the one that has a promise that things will be good for you if you cultivate a strong family relationship. And again, the context talks about moms and dads and kids, but we've got extended family. We've got other people that we can unify, that we're unified with because we're family, that we can work together with. Number 6, do not commit murder. Man, this is another one we could spend a lot of time on. But I think this is really just about the sanctity of life. This is in the context of the same God who says go to war and wipe out this nation says do not commit murder. Therefore, we have to logically go, there's a difference. We have to figure out what that is. God's saying you're not the judge. You're not the executor. That God says that I will be the one who determines those sort of things. You take care of each other. You take care of life. You don't get to take a life just because you want to. That is not your call. That's the way God works on this one. Cannot not commit adultery. Man, this is another one. I could go down a whole lot of stuff here. But I'm not going to because Adam's teaching next week, and I told him I'd finish this. But what does this tell us? This prohibits relations between unmarried people. And that is it. I mean, any sort of physical relationship between any two people who are not married, that's what that's about. And that means two people who are almost married. That means two people who, whatever. That's what that prohibits. It's about purity. And that really, in the context, is a big thing for God with the nation of Israel. We need to stay as a unit. We need to stay this nation moving forward. We can't be corrupt like the people around us. Again, this speaks a lot to the influences that they deal with. You shall not steal. This may be the most cut and dry one there is. Here's an explanation for you. Taking something that is not yours is wrong. Okay, that's easy enough, I think. But what if you're taking somebody's pride? What if you're taking somebody's confidence? Because you undermine them, because you talk bad about them. That's what Jesus says. Treat people how you want to be treated. And don't take somebody's courage. Don't take somebody's viewpoint in life. Don't diminish other people, because that's stealing. That's taking something from them that is theirs, that you don't have the right to take. Don't bear false witness. Just no deception. And again, it's kind of funny because you think about Moses, some of the things that he kind of fabricates a little bit. I'm not saying Moses is lying. That's not what I'm saying. But again, this is pretty simple. Don't make up stuff. Don't say stuff that's not true. Represent yourself. This goes back to doing everything in the name of the Lord. Represent the name that you wear as a Christian the right way. Say what is true. I mean, that's what Jesus says. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. The truth in there is what he gives and what he also expects of us. And then number 10, do not envy. And this is kind of where we were a little bit ago even. This is the incentive. He says, do not covet your neighbor's wife or desire your neighbor's house, his field, his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. This is what I kind of think we were talking about, this idea of covetousness. Covet is, I have the definition, to desire something or someone very strongly with an improper motivation. The incentive here is what we're talking. I think that kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the even the graven images. Is your incentive for this or for that a negative thing? Okay, so what it comes down to for us, do we live specifically by the 10 Commandments? The answer is no. But we live by principles. We live by the new covenant, which again repeats all nine of the 10, and basically the 10th even. But we're people who there's still a need for our loyalty. There's still a need for our obedience to what God tells us to do and to be. And that's how real renewal happens. When we decide to get ourselves out of the way and let God make the decisions. Yeah, that's Charlton Heston, for those of you who don't know. Sort of. But so that's the idea with these commandments. A lot to them, a lot more we could talk about, but we can't spend the time on that. Any thoughts real fast before we have to get out of here?
Honor your father and mother doesn't justify to kids and their parents
Absolutely.
when they're older.
Yeah, the honor your father and mother thing doesn't end. There's no expiration date on that. Okay, Adam will be teaching next week, so thank you in advance. Thank you all for your attention.